Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Shushock, and I am the grateful pastor here at Edges. And if you're going to pick an adjective by which you are going to introduce yourself every week, you should make sure it will last during all seasons. I'm grateful to be with you this morning. Actually, I've waited all week to be with you. You are my compass. You are the way I see God. We've been in the middle of a series here. It's been called Migration. We've been talking over the last several weeks about how migration is a movement toward something new because of a need for something more or better or different. Throughout the series, we've been asking what kinds of migrations could or should be a way of life for people of faith. With God as my witness, the timing for this series was on purpose. In addition to exploring the theological and biblical ideas that might be new for many of us, we imagined that this series would be like a primary source for how we might process and then proceed after the General Conference of the United Methodist Church, which concluded just this past Tuesday. This morning, I had planned to convene a conversation around the idea of missional migration. In 6 years, I have never bumped a planned sermon in order to address a current event. But today, based on the outcomes now searing across headlines and hearts, and after conversations with many of you this week, I've decided to try to offer a few contextual thoughts. I'll ask you for your grace. Let me take a moment to help us all get on the same page. Last week, the General Conference of the United Methodist Church met in St. Louis. This matters for us because Edges is part of the much larger United Methodist Church, sort of like how the Pamplin School of Business is part of Virginia Tech. The General Conference is the legislative body of the United Methodist Church, and it's comprised of more than 800 delegates from around the world. The delegates are elected to the conference, and that's how they go, and they make up both clergy and lay people. The General Conference meets usually every 4 years, but it met in a special session last week in order to deal with matters of ministry regarding lesbian and gay people. Specifically, this conference sought to decide whether same-sex marriages could be performed by United Methodist clergy and whether gay or lesbian persons could be ordained, that is, affirmed, as spiritual leaders in the United Methodist Church. I know even the language I just used may seem arcane, but those are the actual linguistics, and they lead to important questions for United Methodists to settle, and here's why. The policies that govern our denomination say that same-sex marriage and ordination are not on the table for practicing homosexuals. And our practices say otherwise. Many same-sex weddings have already been performed by United Methodist clergy. And gay and lesbian people have been ordained and are currently openly serving as pastors in our churches. We have one openly gay United Methodist bishop in our denomination. I, along with many others in the denomination, believed this growing chasm between our policies and our actual practices signaled the beginning of a spiritual migration. Many of us prayed and dared to hope that the legislative decisions made by our General Conference would be something that God could use to initiate a season of denominational migration in our church. In a nutshell, the General Conference rejected a plan that would have allowed pastors and churches to follow their own consciences, and instead reaffirmed our denomination's decades-old prohibition of same-sex marriage and the ordination of practicing homosexuals. And the General Conference adopted enhanced enforcement provisions to address those who violate the church's actual positions. And the General Conference adopted provisions that would allow churches who cannot abide by these official positions to gracefully exit our denomination after meeting their obligations. All of this will need to be reviewed by the Judicial Council of the United Methodist Church, which is similar to the United States Supreme Court. And just like the United States, the United Methodist Church has its own constitution. It is quite possible that some or all of the actions of the General Conference will be ruled unconstitutional, in which case we will revert to the language of our existing governing documents, the Book of Discipline. There will be more details and more discussion about this conference and these decisions this afternoon at 4 o'clock at our Church Street campus. Justice was so gracious in his invitation to you to be there. I would like to implore you to be there as we continue to move forward in our church. For now, according to our governing bodies, it appears there is a denominational migration away from full inclusivity in the United Methodist Church. I want to be both honest and clear this morning. While there are some churches for whom these decisions are comforting or even courageous, this Edges community is not among them. The decisions I just shared with you simply do not represent our way of life. Here, our practices have always been inclusive. They have always been fully inclusive. Gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender and queer and questioning and intersex and ally siblings of ours have not always been welcome here. They have always been necessary here. Edges could not be the church without them. They lead our ministries. They love our children. They make our coffee. They shepherd our vision. They are our spiritual mentors. But we do not need them for these things. We need them because they widen our experience of God. I also want to be clear in acknowledging that our way of life has been true, even though we don't all hold the same beliefs. This community is a home for both traditionalists and progressives. Some might ask how this is possible. I believe it can be boiled down to this. I believe we have learned to trust the diversity of God's humanity in all its forms. Here, we live in a wide, open, breezy tent where there are no doors, open or closed. We don't control who comes or goes. When we do stake our common beliefs and pitch our tent someplace, We stake that into the love of God. That seems to hold us quite well in all kinds of weather. As far as the prayers we prayed for denominational and spiritual migration, I don't think any of us knows the future of our denomination, whether we'll stay one, become two, or even many. But I believe God is already answering those prayers, odd as it seems, as a direct result of the General Conference. How could that be true, given that the decisions made there aren't consistent with our practices? Well, because of the General Conference, we now know we must move again. We must prioritize the actual work of reconciliation instead of coasting along in quiet solidarity like most of us were doing last week. Now we know we must move again to stop oppression and harm and injustice instead of simply saying we're sorry for it like we may have done last week. We now know we must move again to be brave and creative and diligent toward unity in the Spirit instead of stagnant and certain in the boundaries of our own structures like we were last week. There are so many Spirit moves to be made from here. You see, I believe God is already using the United Methodist General Conference to help us remember some things that we have forgotten or lost or warped. Values that caused us to be incompatible with the heart of God. But may God help us if we continue to prioritize this migration because of or in response to the rulings of a General Conference. That would make us reactionary, defensive, and deft. We should and can prioritize this work in response to the ongoing call of Jesus. We must prioritize this work because this was the heart of Jesus' life and ministry. And to follow him is to remember the work of creative and brave and diligent reconciliation and transformation. It is to remember that that work will always push the boundaries of our structures. It is to commit to offer our lives to that migration wherever it takes us. And now one final, very personal word. I know I do not speak for everyone when I say this. But to my gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender and queer and questioning and intersex and ally siblings, especially those who are in the room this morning, I want you to know that I do not believe the letters LGBTQIA+ stand for your sexual practices. I believe they are an acronym for the ways the love of God makes it into this world. And I am sorry for the ways that I have operated like you only needed my private support when you also needed my public solidarity, especially as one small representative of God. And I am busy matchmaking your holy matrimonies. I can't wait to be present as God calls you into full-time ministry. To my traditionalist friends, I want you to know that I am dependent upon your patience, your wisdom, and your gracious care. I am sorry for the ways I have acted with ego and with self-protection. I am sorry for the ways I have acted like I am right or like I know everything, instead of acting with partnership under the umbrella of God's Spirit. And to all of us, in my experience, the beginning of hope is rarely as warm and fuzzy as we hope it will be. Our discernment will only happen as we seek to hear the voice of God from among all the voices clamoring for our attention. And none of us can figure that out alone or disconnected from the body. That's why I want to ask you to hold on a little more as we do the work together. This is not the end. Friends, I believe we are moving toward a new beginning with God's wild Spirit. I wonder if it should always feel like this. Please know that this migration comes with this promise from Jesus, who spoke it first and forever to a bunch of shaken followers like us. Remember, he said, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age. So let it be.